and I'm going to start by telling you a secret. The thing that made me most anxious about flying passenger jets was passenger announcements. I grew up on a council estate in Essex, and you know, I had a chip on my shoulder. I thought, what will these passengers think when they hear my accent? But here we are. And essentially, one of the things I learned, 5 years of training, 2 years working as a flying instructor and 3 years in the airlines, is that as pilots, we're trained to think free from bias, to mitigate risk, to preserve life. The mantra in our industry is safety is our number one priority. I'm not going to talk about roadmaps of the future. I just want to look at the reality of the world in which we live right now. We've had Dubai Airport underwater. We've had Frankfurt Airport underwater. We've had Mallorca Airport underwater. We've had airports surrounded by forest fires. We've got destinations that we know and love and we want to visit going underwater. The Maldives will go underwater. Even if we were zero emissions tomorrow, which would be marvellous, it's never going to happen. The baked-in system in our climate means that we are still going to see sea levels rise. We're still going to see extreme weather events getting worse, which are killing people right now. Right now, globally, 1 in 5 people around the world die prematurely due to the air that we breathe. Okay, so let's look at aviation. Why? I mean, okay, so it sounds like I'm anti-aviation, but actually, I love flying. I wanted to fly since I was 5 years old. It was an absolute dream for me, and I'm still in like 80 grand's worth of flight training debt. The media like to portray me as a hero, but really, I'm just a product of circumstances. I had my medical revoked. I got bitten by a tick in Richmond Park. Got diagnosed with Lyme disease. It's much more prevalent due to milder winters and warmer summers. I went on a trip with my staff travel benefits with British Airways to Peru for the first time, to South America. I was invited to go to a place called Rainbow Mountain. It's 100 meters lower than Everest Base Camp, and all the snow melted on top. And I'm looking at this beautifully colored Rainbow Mountain, and I'm seeing mass tourism and climate change firsthand. That was a seed in 2017 that planted and grew in me, which led to an emotional conflict. I can't actually get my medical back because the Civil Aviation Authority have recognised that the anxiety I feel, which is a perfectly rational response to an existential threat, means that I can't sit in that plane and fire up the engines knowing that it feels violent to me now. That said, if the industry, the reason I think safe land is important is because we actually want to preserve the longevity of the industry, and it sounds like a bit of a paradox, but we actually need to fly less now so we can preserve the industry for the future. The reason for that is that by 2035 or 2037 at the absolute latest, a report came out a couple of months ago, the aviation industry is going to blow their carbon budget. There isn't a carbon budget left. When I learned that 80% of the world's people have never been on a plane, those people are disproportionately affected by the impacts of my actions as someone that grew up in a fairly relatively privileged Western society. So if we don't do less flying now, then ultimately we're going to see a much bigger crash to the industry than what we witnessed during the pandemic, when millions of aviation workers lost their jobs. So part of our training as pilots is to plan through early design rather than late disaster. We all want to get on our flight and get to the destination, but if at any point along that journey, along that flight, we encountered severe weather or we encountered a technical difficulty which might impact the safety of the flight, without hesitation, we would work effectively with our crew to achieve a safe outcome. And so I think if the aviation industry is serious about protecting jobs, if they're serious about safety, and they're serious about looking at the reality of the world that we already live in, knowing that this is going to be the most stable time for at least the next 100 years, then we need to decarbonise. We need to do more of these types of assemblies, in my opinion. And furthermore, KLM Airlines has just been recently legally challenged by using the term sustainable aviation fuel and talking about climate neutrality. That case said that they can no longer talk about using the word sustainable aviation fuel because sustainable aviation fuels can't actually be scaled. There's a black market emerging in Asia where they're like using actual palm oil rather than used cooking oil. So it's actually a lot of sustainable aviation fuels, even if they could be scaled, even if we had the renewable energy available for green hydrogen, for instance, in 2040, you know, we've got to prioritise renewable energy for schools, housing, home infrastructure. So, you know, aviation is a luxury form of activity, and I'm grateful for everything it's given me. The paradox is that without taking that flight to Peru, I might not have had the experience. I didn't know anything about the climate crisis, and it wasn't until the guide said to me when I'm up there 100 metres lower than Everest Base Camp that Peru was one of the first countries to be hit by the climate crisis. So how much more time do I have?
You've got 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, loads of time. I'm just going to slow down a bit then. Because actually that's what we need to do. We need to decelerate our lives, you know. If I'm travelling close to the speed of sound, that is the most energy intensive activity per hour a human can embark on. That can only be beaten by an astronaut. You know, the anxiety I feel is something I am glad I feel, because millions of people are already, you know, there's been a climate-induced famine in Madagascar. In the Horn of Africa, there's famines. Like, we are going to see wars, famine, drought, you know, exponentially increase in our lifetimes. And why wouldn't I feel depressed on days? Why wouldn't I feel anxious? Why wouldn't I be fearful? Why wouldn't I want to try and help change the industry that I know and love for the workers in that industry as well? And the thing about eco-anxiety is the reason I feel it is because there's a lack of government and industry action. If the industry and the government tomorrow said, yeah, do you know what, we got the numbers wrong, we don't care so much about prioritising money over the health and well-being of people and planet, we're going to actually do what's required based on mainstream science to decarbonise the sector, then the anxiety is gone because it's being dealt with. And I can feel like I've had a part in that, and you know, that's all good. So what else can I say? Oh, so much time. Yeah, there's the anxiety of my just public speaking, but you know, if we think of, you know, we've got this flying analogy of getting to our destination, needing to change course. We can look at that. We can apply that to, you know, the 200 people on that one flight on that one day. We can also zoom out and look at, you know, use that analogy in the context of the airline industry. Because we're hurtling towards a cliff edge, if we don't decelerate now, then, you know, the shareholders will just get to the point where they've maximised their profit, and then we see the crash and we go off the cliff edge. And then there isn't an aviation industry for anyone to enjoy. At 2 degrees of warming, which we're likely to hit before 2050, 99% of our coral reef is going to be bleached. That coral reef provides life to 25% of marine ecosystems. Why do we go on holidays? Because we want to experience these cultures, we want to experience the destinations, we want to go snorkeling, you know. But that you know, I mean, just look on the news, you know. If you just booked a holiday to North Carolina, then you would have been in the midst of a hurricane. And you know, we can if we use that analogy of you know, the Earth systems. When you're on board an aircraft, you're in a closed system. Earth is a system. Everything is connected. You know, there's already people on the flight that have died, and this is about mitigating how many more people, how many more animals go extinct, how much more life is lost before we get to the eventual destination. I'd say we're halfway through the climate story. It's not finished yet, but we have a choice in this moment to decide what the ending looks like. And if we work together, then I do believe that we can achieve that. So I'm going to shut up anyway. Thank you.